Do you have a group of friend or a group of friends who care about you so much that they would be willing to bust you out of jail? No? You either? Yeah, I definitely don't. Actually, I probably do. I don't really know, and I don't intend to find out. But Socrates actually did. You know, Socrates, the guy who we think is possibly real, possibly fake, the guy who didn't really bathe, was kind of a jackass, and questioned everybody in Athens. He had a group of friends so loyal that after he was convicted for not really believing in the gods or spreading false truths about the gods and, corruption of the youth, that whole thing, after he was convicted of corruption of the youth, he was actually sent to jail. He had to wait for the day of his execution. And while waiting for his execution, we ended up getting what is known as the Crito, a Platonic dialogue that details an event days before Socrates died, in which his best friend Crito came to the jail cell to try to convince Socrates to break out and flee to another country. Hi everyone, welcome back to class. So in today's class, we're going to talk about a Platonic dialogue known as the Crito. Now, why do we talk about the Crito in philosophy? Well, there's a number of reasons. One of them being that this is one of the 4 dialogues that you can look at that details Socrates' last few days of life. Now, we have what is known as the Euthyphro, the Apology, the Crito, and the Phaedo, in that order. And I will go ahead and make a correction. I actually misspoke in my Who is Socrates video. I actually made a mistake. I said that you can look at his court case in the dialogue known as the Phaedo. That's my mistake. I got it mixed up with the Apology, and that does happen from time to time. So in the Who is Socrates video, I detail his court case. That is actually found in the Apology. I almost said it again. It's in the Apology. And the dialogue that talks about Socrates' last day, his death, the concepts of immortality and the soul, that is found in the Phaedo. Now, if you haven't watched the Who is Socrates video, and you just really want to know about the Crito, maybe somebody's making you read the Crito for a class, or you want to know about social contract theory, then you don't have to watch the Who is Socrates video. But if you've got the time, I do recommend watching the Who is Socrates video, because that does give us a nice precursor to kind of the life and ideologies of Socrates. So, if you were compiling a playlist of Socrates videos in his life, you would go with Who is Socrates, the Euthyphro, the Apology, the Crito, and the Phaedo. But in this video, we're going to specifically look at the Crito. Now, at this point in Socrates' life, he is in jail, because he has just previously been convicted of corruption of the youth. This carries with it a sentence of execution. So Socrates, as we find him at the start of the dialogue, is awaiting the day of his execution. And when the dialogue starts out, we actually don't start with Socrates. We actually start with one of his best friends, Crito. Crito is actually the one who the dialogue is named after, and it's the only person he speaks to in this dialogue. So Crito arrives at Socrates' jail cell and finds Socrates asleep. Now, Crito, rather than doing the normal thing and waking him up and being like, hey man, I want to talk, he does kind of the thing that's, not great for any friendship. He just watches him sleep. And that's not good. That's really creepy when you think about it, watching him sleep. This man went to sleep in his jail cell expecting to be left alone, and he wakes up now and sees Crito just watching him over the bed. Yeah, sleeping. That's creepy. But Socrates wakes up and he sees Crito is there and he goes, oh, Crito, you're here. I'm sorry I was asleep. I didn't expect you to be here. Socrates is not an idiot. Socrates looks at Crito and asks him, why are you here, Crito? And Crito says, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Socrates, but the ship that is to signify the day of your execution has returned to port, which means that you will be executed tomorrow. Now, Socrates, ever being the one to want to one-up somebody else, looks Crito in the eyes and goes, actually, the ship returned today? Crito says yes, and Socrates goes, well, that means that I will actually be executed the day after tomorrow, because tomorrow will be a holiday to give thanks for the ship's safe return. So I won't be killed tomorrow, I will be killed in 2 days. This is just a wonderful example of the personality of Socrates, that his friend is here to tell him that he's going to die. And Socrates goes, well, hold up. You're wrong in the details of my death, man. You say it's going to be tomorrow? No. It's the day after tomorrow. You forgot about the holiday, you idiot. Like, he just completely forgets about that. So Socrates looks at Crito and goes, why are you really here? You can't be here to tell me that I'm going to die. I already know that I'm going to die. What really brings you to this jail cell tonight, Crito? And Crito looks him in the eye and says, well, Socrates, I'm here to try to convince you to flee Athens and to live your life. Because there was kind of this unspoken rule in Athens at the time where you could impose self-exile upon yourself. You know, you could give the guards enough money, they'd open your cell, give you something, and you could flee. And in fleeing, you just had to never return to Athens. This is what we mean by self-exile. Socrates could have gone to any number of countries, any other city, anywhere in the world that was not the city-state of Athens, and he would be fine. They weren't going to hunt him down. They weren't going to send ye old dog the bounty hunter after him in his medieval Oakleys, being like, come back to Athens, you gotta die, boy. They weren't going to do that. They would just let him be and leave him in peace to live the rest of his life. So Crito has come here to do this, to try to convince Socrates to flee. Now, spoiler, this isn't the first time this has happened. Socrates' friends have come over and over and over again throughout the entirety of his jail sentence to try to convince Socrates to flee. And Socrates has told them over and over and over again, no, I'm going to stay. I'm not going anywhere. Crito's appearance in the jail cell that night was his last chance. It was his last efforts to try to get Socrates to accept that he was going to die and to get him to flee from Athens so that he could live. And over the course of this dialogue, we get 3 arguments from Socrates as to why he has to stay. Because Crito gives 2 why he should leave, and in response, Socrates gives 3 why he should stay. So for the rest of this video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the 3 arguments that Socrates gives to Crito and show how the Crito is actually one of the earliest indicators of what we call now the social contract. So the very first argument that Crito gives to Socrates as to why he should flee is more of a selfish one. And he's trying to play on Socrates' empathetic aspects. He's trying to play up on Socrates' love for his friends. So Crito looks at Socrates and says, look, Socrates, all of your friends love you. They have come from near and far. They have brought all of their money, all of their gold, everything that they own, so that we can pay the guards to allow for you to leave to impose self-exile on yourself. But you have constantly told us no. And people around Athens are beginning to talk. They're beginning to say that we are selfish, money-hungry individuals who only care about our coin and not the life of our best friend. They think that we're selfish and cruel. You don't want that for us, do you, Socrates? You don't want people to think that we care more about gold coins than the life of our friends, do you? This is an argument of public opinion. Crito is trying to convince Socrates to leave by saying that the public is forming an opinion that Crito and all of Socrates' other friends only care about money, that they don't care about the life of Socrates. So he's really playing up this idea of public opinion, and that the public opinion matters. Socrates looks at Crito and tells him, who cares what the public thinks? He tells Crito that you really just shouldn't care what the public thinks. If the public thinks you care only about money and that you're money hungry, then let them, because you cannot control public opinion. And in fact, Socrates goes on to say that the only opinion that matters is a wise opinion. So Socrates in this moment defines 2 different types of opinions. He defines what we call a wise opinion and a foolish opinion. A wise opinion is informed, it is educated, and it is involved in the situation. Essentially, it knows the facts. It knows what's happening, it knows the people, it knows the situation. So a wise opinion comes from a person who can make a wise judgment. They're someone who knows enough about the situation that they can rationally look through the criteria and make an informed decision. A foolish opinion is the exact opposite of this. A foolish opinion is uninvolved, uninformed, and uneducated. A foolish opinion is one that does not know the situation, that does not know the facts. They are one that hears it through hearsay or hears it through rumor, and so they jump to a conclusion. Socrates tells Crito in this moment that he should only care about the wise opinion. He should only care about the opinions of those who know the situation, his family, his friends, because the wise opinions know. The informed and involved opinions, the people who know him, know that Crito doesn't just care about money, that Crito does care about Socrates' life, that he has come here day after day after day to try to convince him to leave. The random person on the street might jump to a conclusion, but you cannot control that person. You cannot control their opinions. Socrates argues that the public a public opinion, more often than not, is a foolish opinion. Because the public really just latches on to the first thing that they hear. They hear it and they go, well, that's the story. That's what it has to be. And yes, it is possible for the public opinion to change and grow over time once more facts and ideas are revealed. But a lot of the time, public opinion really just sticks with what it is. I mean, at the time of recording this, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And the amount of misinformation that has been spread and continues to stay in the public lexicon is mind-boggling. Because it's been debunked. It's been disproved that certain things are true and that certain things are false. Like, we've filtered out the information. We know that the virus is deadly. We know that wearing a mask helps. We know that wearing a mask doesn't affect your CO2 or oxygen levels in your body. And yet, that information that it is harmful to wear a mask or that the virus isn't as deadly, that information continues to be spread like wildfire through the country, through public opinion, because the public grabs onto the first thing that it hears and it maintains that. And just some foolish opinions you cannot change. So Socrates tells Crito not to care about public opinion. You know, those people on the street, they don't know him. And after passing him on the street, he will likely never see them again. Instead, the opinions that he should care about are those of the wise opinion, the opinions of his family and friends and the people that he interacts with on a daily basis. So this is the first argument that we get between Crito and Socrates. So the second argument that we get is actually much simpler because it really serves as a transitionary point in the dialogue to Socrates' third argument. Crito, after hearing this about public opinion, agrees with Socrates and goes, okay, you're right. I probably shouldn't care what the public thinks. But, here's the second argument, they have dealt you a great injustice, Socrates. They have falsely convicted you for a crime that we all know that you didn't commit. So aren't you within your right to deal them an injustice back and flee from this punishment? That's Crito's last argument. His argument is the idea that Socrates has been met with an injustice, and so he should be within his right to perform an injustice as well, as a way of giving it back to the city that has failed him. Socrates says that Crito's argument is flawed on two accounts. The first is essentially the old adage that you're all familiar with, I am sure, the idea that two wrongs don't make a right. Socrates argues that injustice should never be met with injustice, because all that does is it just breeds more injustice. It breeds more wrong into the world. And it would actually undercut and undermine everything that Socrates has tried to do. So, looking at this first rebuttal from Socrates, let's look at an example. So Socrates in this moment is saying, Miletus and company, the guys who brought him the charges of corruption of the youth, claim that Socrates doesn't care about Athens or its laws. So if Socrates is to flee from Athens, all he's going to do is prove them right. He will meet their injustice with his own injustice, but Miletus and company will be validated. It will prove to them, yes, see, Socrates doesn't care about the laws. He met it with his own injustice. He was performing bad actions to prove us wrong. It validates their point. Think about it this way. Here's the example. Imagine someone is going around saying you are petty, that you are a petty, petty, petty person. And you hear it. You hear that Susie is calling you petty. And she then asks for your help. And you could help her. Or you could be petty and turn her down. If you're petty and you one-up Susie or you prove her wrong in some way, everybody's going to look at it and go, well, look, yeah, Susie was right. You were a petty person. Socrates says we have to rise above that we can't feed into their expectations, that instead, rather than meeting people's expectations of us, their bad expectations of us, with that exact expectation, we should meet them with justice. We should meet them with truth. If people are saying that Socrates doesn't care about justice, that he is going against the laws of Athens and that he doesn't care about Athens, then Socrates needs to meet their belief that he is injustice with his own justice. So in staying and following through with his punishment, he's proving them wrong, and he's validating his own point. He's proving that he does care about Athens, that he does care about the city, and he does care about its laws, and that he's not willing to undercut that no matter what. The second argument that we get from Socrates builds off of this. And this is where, when you read the Crito, it does get a little weird. This is the section of the dialogue where Socrates' rebuttals start getting big chunks and paragraphs, big chunks. And it's probably the part where you got a little confused, because Socrates starts talking to himself as though he is both Socrates and the city-state of Athens. But the argument here is actually pretty simple. Socrates' argument is that of social obligation. He essentially argues that we must honor the state, honor the city-state. Hello, cat. That we must honor the state the same way that we honor our parents. Society, he argues, raises you. Bless you. It gives you food. Oh, he is going crazy. It gives you food, it gives you shelter, it gives you protection and welfare. And all that the city-state asks for in return is that you follow the law, that you don't break the law, and that when you do break the law, that you follow through with the punishments that are expected of you. So essentially, Socrates is saying that he owes it to Athens to go through with his execution, because he believes in the laws of Athens. He actually believes in the law that if someone is convicted of corruption of the youth, then they should be executed. He argues that it is actually hypocritical for him to flee from this, because if it was anyone but himself, he would expect them to follow through with it. So why should he hold himself to a different standard than anyone else? The laws of the society are meant to apply to everyone, including Socrates, equally. The honor and the respect that we have to give to that society applies to everyone equally. So he has a social obligation, a moral obligation, to follow through with the execution, because he owes it to Athens for protecting him, feeding him, clothing him, and sheltering him his entire life. Now, Socrates does admit that no society is perfect. Socrates, being the kind of the skeptic that he was, isn't going to say that Athens is perfect. But at least in this capacity, he does think that the law of corruption of the youth being executed is a just law. And he argues that once convicted of a law, that is not the time to try to change it. He says that we can try to change the law, but we have to do so through essentially consulting our representative, or through protest, or by leaving if we don't agree with the laws of the city. But he loves the city-state of Athens so much that he was never going to leave. In fact, he wants his children to continue to be raised there, and his grandchildren to be raised there. So his only avenues for change at that point are to talk to his senator or to protest. And once being convicted, that's not the time to protest, according to Socrates. He actually thinks that he is now obligated to go through with the punishment, because he owes it to Athens, because he agreed to the laws, he thought they were just laws, and just because he's been convicted doesn't mean that he now gets special treatment. Now, you may or not agree with Socrates here. You might disagree with him and say, well, no, he was unjustly convicted, so that would be the perfect time to protest. And this is something very much that we can talk about, and have talked about, going forward from the Crito with political science and political science debates. It's this idea that at what point does an unjust law become so unjust that we no longer have to follow it? Or at what point does a bad conviction make it so that we don't have to follow through with the punishment? These are all different political science arguments and debates that we have had throughout the millennia. The ideas that Socrates talks about here, this isn't even really where this idea has stopped growing. Cut forward a few hundred years, you then get an individual named Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and they talk about what is known as the social contract. So in another video, we're going to continue this line of thinking and talk about the social contract and look at how Socrates' social obligation evolved and developed into this new idea of the social contract, because the social contract actually looks to solve some of those problems you might be having with Socrates' argument. But one of the big reasons I like to talk about the Crito is it does give us that kind of foundational level when looking at the social contract, because even though Socrates doesn't call his idea on social obligation a social contract, that is, in the most basic essence of it, what it is. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick rundown and analysis of the Crito, as well as the arguments found within. I hope you learned a little bit of something about Socrates and his social political views and this idea of the social obligation. and I look forward to seeing you in the next video when we talk about the social contract. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.